Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 162 of the Peak of Serenity podcast. Uh, I am, as always, one of your hosts, Emerson, and joining me, we have my co host, Namali.
Hello.
And we are back after a couple weeks off for just IRL stuff, vacations, family stuff, all that kind of thing. Um, and man, a lot has happened.
It is, yeah, it's been crazy. I picked, I think, the wrong week to have vacation because there's been a lot of stuff has come out over the past 2 weeks. So it'll be
Uh,
an interesting episode.
Yeah. In addition, I want to briefly mention one thing we're trying today, and we're probably going to try over the next few episodes, is cutting back on the time, the length of the episodes from we had been hitting like an hour and a half. We're going to try going for an hour and see how it feels. See if we feel like we're covering as much fluff versus like the main topics that we
Yeah.
want to really focus on. Um, but speaking of things happening, how has your progression been? Have you so you were on vacation? Did you actually
I was
progress?
so I have gotten one night in on Echo. So we'd killed Magmorax, basically the day or my last raid before vacation. So I got like half a night there on Echo while we were setting up weak auras and like learning positioning and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And then I missed two raids. And then I was back this week, and yeah, I was back in because we've had a ton of roster changes. I don't think we've pulled with the same roster. It's another like
Oh
what buffs
no.
is that? I think it was what was the last? I think it was even Razageth was like this, where like we had one or two people different. Only this time we're having larger differences. We had a priest quit of our
Oh
holy
no.
priest. So our preservation evoker, who had a priest ready, luckily is going to play priest now, which means I'm in healing, which means now we have monk buff because we didn't have monk buff before, but it also means one of
Ooh.
our tanks is left on a lengthy vacation. Um,
Oh no.
so now we have a new tank. Plus was one of our warriors, so we're missing a shout. So Echo's been fun. I think we're at about 110 pulls in, about 34%. I think at this point, if or no, sorry, even lower, we're at like sub 10% wipes. But none of those have been clean zero deaths into P3. So I think if we can
Yeah.
pull together a zero death P3, we kill it, right? I think it's one of those fights where like
Yeah.
if you get to P3 with all your raid alive, P3 isn't too difficult in terms of like execution.
So
So
we killed Neltharion on Friday. I think last time we had the podcast, I was still working on Zskarn.
yeah,
Is
yeah.
like how long it's been, and I guess kind of also how quickly the progression in this raid is going.
Yeah.
We were still working on Zskarn, and we killed it like the very beginning. We spent like 30 minutes on it the next Friday, and it was
Hmm.
dead. And so then like Magmorax was dead that weekend, and we started on Neltharion, and now Neltharion died early on Friday.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
and it's basically the like what you're saying about like getting to phase three and everybody alive, and I think that is 100% like accurate. If you get to phase three and you haven't had, even if you've had to burn B-reses, but if you have all 20 people alive,
Yeah.
you know, and make it through the second portal spawn without really losing, or
Yeah.
second Ebon destruction, and that's really where we actually ran into some slight issues. Uh, the boss positioning for that is very tight. It's not like
To
hard to
move.
do, but it's like you have to get it right or you don't get the correct portal spawns, and people's map recores are just misleading because the portals that they're assigned don't exist.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we had a few pulls that like realistically could have been maybe kills if we had put the boss in the correct position. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, we then we came back in on Friday and we struggled around in phase one and phase two for a bit before we just like got back to phase three with everybody alive. We got the boss in the right position and then it died.
That it died. Yeah. Yeah. I will say that I do not enjoy the boss at all. I don't like the weak. I don't like the dependency on the weak aura
Yes.
because of how janky. This isn't like an Archimon like radar weak aura where like it's dynamic and it updates and like you know exactly where you need to position and it's fine. It's like the boss is in the right position, the portals don't spawn right, but even then, you sometimes get assigned to a position that doesn't have a portal for
Yeah.
whatever reason. And so like, or in my case, I did the right thing, downloaded the latest version of the weak aura that shows the map. Didn't show my green circle. the entire night. And so I was just killing people. Like I killed like at least two of our polls. I killed someone by just taking one of their portals. And
Yeah,
so like had somebody send me a weak core that like this mine works, and like I think it's like a version or two behind what's on Wago. Um, but
interesting.
yeah, I'm like I finally got a read circle, and I was cool. But yeah, it's I don't know. It's a fine progression boss. There's a I mean it's I thought I'd hate it more. There's not as much line of sight issues as I thought.
Yeah.
Even with the walls. So
So
it
one of the
didn't.
things that I think on PTR had a thing where you had to take the hearts out of line of sight,
Yeah.
and that got removed. Um, I think it got replaced with a worse mechanic where the hearts were like insanely large.
Circles, yeah.
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 Um, but yeah, line of sight was not that big of a deal. I thought it was a fun progress fight once you got through these weak aura issues. Like the weak aura stuff was honestly really frustrating.
Yeah.
Um, we had some roster stuff that we had to deal with during progress on this boss, and so like our first raid night on this boss, we're like setting everything up and getting everything good to go, and we have a second night on the boss and everything's going well, and then the third night we have to swap like 4 people,
Oh Jesus.
and a couple of them had already got everything set up. A couple of them had been out of town on vacation, hadn't set things up. One guy literally got back in town like the afternoon of that raid night, and so had not gotten everything set up. And so we didn't we spent like an hour that night just doing weak aura stuff all over again.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the annoying part. But if you kill it, so congrats on Echoes. That means have you gotten some Sarkreth pulls in?
We got about 2 hours on Zarkreth on Friday. We have made it into phase 2, which is honestly faster than I was expecting because phase 1 is just so much damage,
Yeah.
absolutely ridiculous amount of damage going out. And we've made it into phase 2, not with everybody alive, but like 18, 19 people alive, right?
Oh
So
nice,
there's still
nice.
a long way to go towards like making it there with nobody dead, so we don't have to blow up res,
Hmm.
um, and all that. But making good progress. We go back in tonight, and I think the main focus is going to be learning the phase 2 dance so that we can have everything set up good for phase 3. But yeah, Sarkreth, it's going good so far. Very few. It's so weird going from Neltharion where it's like weak aura central. You just have to have these big assignment weak auras
Yeah.
that uh, to Sarkareth where you just don't.
Yeah.
You just don't. There's like reminder weak auras for people, but it's like, okay, you two are the first bombs in phase 2, and you two are the second bombs in phase 2, and you could just memorize that. You could just remember
Yeah.
that. You don't need an assignment weak aura for it. And the only other like assignment weak aura thing that we have is an interrupt weak aura for
Okay.
the big ad in phase 2. Um, yeah. So it's going good so far.
Nice.
Going good so far.
Nice. Yeah, our goal is I think try and kill Echo this Tuesday coming up, and then we'll be on Sarkareth together. So um well, cool. Well, yeah, it's a little bit of a catch up there. Yeah, we've made a lot of progress. So I guess maybe jump into a little bit of review of things that have happened over the past, say, 2-ish weeks. A lot of this is really just from the past week, but a couple of things we wanted to sort of talk about or bring up. So the first one is Trial of the Grand Crusader launched on Wrath Classic and was defeated in 19 minutes and 41 seconds.
Yep.
Um, by the Guild Progress. They beat Beef Bar by 6 seconds, which is crazy. Um, but yeah, no, Trial of the Grand Crusader out there. Another fun progression thing with Classic. I don't know if you rated this one, but this raid will always have a super special place in my heart because I ended up being. They've actually changed this in Wrath Classic, but in original Wrath, for a Nubarak, you had what they called a block tank, where if you could guarantee you had max block at all times, you could tank all of the ads right on top of him.
Yeah.
And the thing is with the ads is like, I don't know how they do it now. I think you can stun them and they just have a bunch of DPS. But at the time, if any of the two little ads are near each other or near the boss, they gain attack speed.
Right.
And so the
Yeah,
idea
that's
is
still the case.
oh, it's still the case. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you tanked all four of them together, your tanks would get obliterated because the mobs would be attacking like every quarter second or something ridiculous.
Yeah.
But if you had max block, essentially reduce the damage to a more manageable level. So I was the block tank there. It was really fun. The positioning was so specific because like you couldn't have them hit you from behind because you only block when
from
a
the
mob hits
front.
you in the front.
Yep.
Yeah. But it was a fun boss. It was a fun raid, so I liked it. It had a lot of different interesting fights. It was probably the first version of a like mini tier that they ever did. So similar to like Persia or like what is it, Trial of Valor,
Yeah.
like Odin and those guys, that tier, and then the one that no one did,
The
Unat's
Unat
tier.
tier, yeah.
Yeah, the Unat tier in BFA. Yeah, so I mean, it was their first shot at I think they called it like a full tier, but to be fair, it was 5 boss or 5 encounters, and like
Yeah.
it was even pretty quick from a progression point of view back then. So
Yeah. It was also
um,
the introduction of like raid difficulties. It was the first
yeah,
heroic raid. So there's that going for it. Uh yeah,
and
it's
limited attempts too, I think.
there was an achievement. There was not limited attempts. There's an achievement that gives you a high item level cloak for completing it with fewer than 50 wipes.
Gotcha. Yeah, and then I think there's an achievement if you do it without anyone dying plus not
Yeah.
wiping.
So I can say that um every group that I looked at that had cleared the raid, that had killed all 5 bosses, did it with
Yeah.
like 15 or fewer wipes, right?
Yeah.
It far below the 50 wipe cutoff. But then there's, the long tail of people just like the 4 of 5
Yeah.
clears on heroic that did not. So yeah, it's
It's funny. It's funny how close the race was. 6 seconds for between first and second, which is crazy.
I don't want to spend too much time on this, but there was a little bit of drama because some people figured out a way to skip some of the RP,
Oh, really?
which when
Oh,
your
by zoning in
margin
and out, right?
is 6 seconds, right? Like that matters.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how they did it. I heard about it secondhand. I was actually busy doing bug fixes because I broke things
Nice.
on Warcraft logs. But it apparently was a thing. So
That's interesting. That's funny. But yeah, I mean, congratulations to Progress for winning Beef Bar, being second. I think those two guilds generally are two of the top on Classic. So good for them. All right, moving on. I guess moving back to retail stuff. For Retail Hall of Fame, it is now closed or will be closed at the end of this week. So Hall of Fame for Mythic Aberrus will close at the end of this week. So if you're trying to get there, if you're close, put in that extra time, going to overtime, and you'll be immortalized. I think it's the first dual or like single
yep,
listing, right? So there's no
yeah.
longer Horde and Alliance, of course. It's just the first 200 guilds now to kill
Yeah, and
Mythic
that's
Starcraft.
it definitely I think it got easier to get into it as a horde guild, but of course
Oh yeah,
harder to get into it as an alliance guild. Um, if we needed to be like 2 hours of raid time faster
yeah,
before Zskarn in order to be able to take advantage of the cheese, which then just cuts off, a week of raid time.
yeah. One reset, yeah. Basically, you gain a reset, yeah.
And if we were at that point, now there's things like that would have put us spending a week on Neltharion before his nerf
Hmm.
to the size of the volcanic hearts. So maybe we would have lost it back there, right?
Yeah,
But you know, if we had been just that little bit faster, it really does boil down in some ways to that like 2 hours before the Zskarn situation, which would have
yeah,
enabled us to just, grab 40 or grab 20 people. It does not, like, the comp check on that was just not a thing, and just go in there and cheese the boss on like a Thursday, and then go
hmm
work on Magmorax on our actual raid night. Um, but because we weren't in that position, right, we had to spend that extra week on Zskarn. Um, I don't want to say like we would have gotten Hall of Fame, but we would have been like easily the closest that we had ever been. Like
yeah.
way closer than any previous tier. Um, but you know,
Okay, yeah. I mean, yeah. I think that's the most annoying part. I think of this tier is Skarn, and I guess we'll get into that. We'll talk about that in a little bit.
yeah,
But yeah, close. then in other news, there are some hot fixes coming up this Tuesday. So with the well, we'll say with the weekly resets this week, so Tuesday, Wednesday if you're EU, um, that do affect monks. Windwalker is getting a flat or a buff of 3% more damage.
Woo!
I don't know if this matters, but they probably don't
No,
care.
it doesn't.
Um, but more damage for your Windwalker monks this week if you still run one. We don't because they're not good. Um,
There's also Feral Druid, 3%, 1 DK, 6.5%. I don't know. Demon Hunter got like 5 different abilities buffed by 15%.
yeah.
Small BM buffs. Shadow Priest got basically a rework.
Again, for
Again.
literally the 10th time this expansion.
Um,
God.
and pretty substantial changes for just like a weekly hotfix.
That is, yeah.
I'll
I think
take it.
I think our Demon Hunter definitely was, we'll say, excited.
Yeah.
He only plays Demon Hunter because we don't have another one. So but yeah, they'll look a little bit better. So um but cool. I think that's it for at least sort of the weekly stuff. There was a fairly large update to PTR. So the 10.15 PTR got a pretty substantial update this week. Contained a bunch of changes, particularly for if we focus on a couple classes, maybe not monks, and we'll talk about monks, but mages got a ton of different of reworks, both damage increases, decreases across fire and frost. Augmentation had some pretty substantial updates too to a lot of their buffs and what they're doing. Um, so it's sort of good that they're trying to zone in or hone in on the augmentation pieces. And then Paladin got a Holy Paladin specifically got almost a not a, I wouldn't say another like complete rework, but a lot of changes that would have pushed them maybe towards a more caster focused spec versus the melee one that they do have. So interesting. In terms of like monk specific stuff, I guess I guess one other thing before the monk stuff, there was one item that was nerfed, the Seal of Diurna, which is the ring off of
Yeah.
Aranog, was nerfed by 25%. So that basically pushes it off. I know that we were talking about before the podcast started, but we still farm Aranog for one of our or one or two of our players because they need a ring. It was still really good. It was going to continue to be good until this change. Um, so this is a 10.15 change, but
Yeah.
ring no longer really required going in there. And then you
The
had mentioned they nerfed the stones, right?
yeah,
The
the
probably,
Onyx ring also getting nerfed by 40%.
yeah.
Um I think this still puts them both in the realm of like being competitive for tanks with stat
Mhm.
rings. So
Gotcha.
but not so much that it's like you must be wearing these or you're actively throwing, right? Like if
Mhm.
right now in 10.1 you are not wearing the Onyx ring as a tank, you are making a mistake and you should get one. Um, the Aranog ring is a little bit harder because you need a mythic one. Um, you can no longer socket them, so like you can't get a mythic socketed one particularly easily.
Yep.
Whereas if you played season one, like I have a mythic socketed speed one, I think actually, um, because it turns out it was really easy to get them if you only killed Aranog and Primal Council for your vault slot every week.
Yeah. 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 Because those are the only two things on your loot table. Yeah. Makes it easy.
Um,
Um,
But yeah, so those are the last numbers that I saw still good. So you're not gonna like have to immediately replace them when the patch comes out. But especially with the ability to get 447 rings through crafting with perfect stats and sockets, you're probably going to replace them.
gotcha. Yeah. Um, yeah. So those are two, I think, big changes items. It just means, I mean, healer wise too, the Onyx ring at least was very good. And people were starting to replace it as you get to like max level, like mythic item level type stuff.
Right.
But even for Mistweaver, like it's still those gems are like 6 to 8% of my healing on any given fight, which is a massive amount, right? I think
Yeah.
rings sort of start to tip over around the 6-ish% mark. So like once the gems do like less than 6% of your healing, it's a good time to replace it. But yeah, it just means that I'll have to find a new ring here in the next couple weeks. for the monk.
Oh, one thing that we actually missed that I do want to mention while we're on the subject of what you replace your items with, you can
Mhm.
now, in addition to buying a socket with the like pity currency from the Great Vault,
Oh,
you can buy half of a spark, which is useful if you are anticipating having to replace items
mhm.
with 1015. It can give you a couple of extra sparks that you can work with to go and replace those rings, for example. So that's actually what I'm doing right now. I don't really have any like high value socket stuff. I could get like a socket, or I could. What I did this week is I picked up an extra spark, which lets me craft an extra this week. Um,
Gotcha.
and then when 1015 comes out, I'll have more sparks to throw at making rings.
Nice. Yeah, oh yeah, that's true. I need to maybe pick those up next week since I'm all socketed out. So, um, but cool, yeah. And then there were maybe on the monk changes. I know we're gonna do a deep dive on the brewmaster changes. I'm assuming this is a part of the
Yeah,
the 1015 stuff. Yeah.
yeah,
So we know there's brewmaster changes. We'll talk about them in a couple minutes. There's a
yeah.
couple other topics we want to get to before we get to that. I guess one thing on Mistweaver, which is easy, is just there was a damage reduction on Awakened Phalanx, or sorry, a healing reduction on Awakened Phalanx. It's now 70% of the damage done versus 75%. This is just based on the fact that global damage has gone up. They're just sort of adjusting the healing component to keep it in line with what they expect. So not a generally a net zero change um, in terms of the healing Awakened Phalanx produces. One big thing that also sort of dropped on 1015 this week was all of or a lot of brand new items from the new mega dungeon. So there's a new mega dungeon coming up called Dawn of the Infinite. It's essentially like the Mechagon dungeon of this expansion. Um, and they all contain an interesting set of new stats. So there's 4 new stats that have currently been data mined. There is Time Strike, which no one knows what it does just yet. It's just a 10% chance to do something.
I hate
Um,
those so much. I hate
yeah,
like the same as the stupid trinket from the other side in Shadowlands. Like
yeah.
the use question mark one. I like people figure out what it does. Like just tell us. Give us at
Yeah.
least some idea of what it does. If you can't give us an idea of what it does, then it's just a bad effect.
Right. Or like, I mean, I think the idea too is like, and we could maybe we talk about this just real quick. Is it would be fine if they tell us what it does in like a blue post. Don't put it in the tooltip. Like
Well,
leave the
no, put it
tooltip
in the
flavor
tool.
for like a normal player.
I
But
think put
like,
it in the tooltip, but like Time Strike, like okay, so one of the issues with that trinket from Shadowlands is that it could do anything, but you never wanted it to do anything. You wanted it to do one thing. And so the
well, yeah,
whole
that's
thing was basically figuring out how to cheese the things that you could always get the thing that you wanted. Because that thing was so ridiculously powerful because it was supposed to be balanced out by getting the
yeah,
other things. But then there's also like if you don't tell a player what an item does, in some sense, like does it do damage? Does it do healing? What does it do? Then the player cannot decide whether they want to put the item on or not.
yeah. That's fair. I mean, I would counter that with like, I think that's one way to look at it. The other idea is there needs to be some sort of flavor around it. So I
Yeah.
get the use question mark question mark question mark, probably a bad example of like them
Eh,
doing that, but
yeah.
like if they said like use for like some sort of offensive effect, like I know there's probably a better way to write it, but that way
Yeah.
the trinket is used
Yes.
offensively, and so like you might not know if it's like a dot or a direct
And
damage piece or anything like that,
and
but yeah,
that's kind of my point is that it's like
yeah,
they don't have to like list out use pick one of the following at random A B C D E F G, right? It doesn't have to
right,
be that, but something that like imagine if that trinket had been use uh increases your damage question mark as
yeah,
it's just like it can still be flavorful and mysterious and like, ooh, what does this do, let's figure out what it does and how to use it, but it doesn't
uh-huh,
need to be like so wide open and useless. Like I mean, it's it wasn't useless because it always basically you could just always use it on pull and it would always give you the huge stats and you just fucking prayed that it would give you the stats
yeah,
on later ones. Um
yeah,
and all that, but like these items that are just like I hate these ones where it's like it could be anything, and one of the
yeah,
things is just absurdly good and it basically means that you just like use it and you hope that you get the good thing. That
Yeah,
sucks. I
exactly.
hate that.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
So I hope the time strike is not that. I hope that it's just like, some kind of like, it's some kind of proc on hit, but
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's an interaction because like the rest of them. So Time Strike's the first one, which doesn't seem to have a corresponding effect. But then like Demon's Bane seems to appear on the new Gorehound weapon or Gorehowl weapon. I'm sorry, and it, does something with the effects of Gorehowl, which is interesting, like applying a bleed, um, but only to demons. So it's interesting. Scourgebane, very similar type weapon. Instead of on demons, it does additional damage or triggers damage on undead enemies with Lion's Light. And then finally, Spirit's back on only a single cloth piece. So
and it gives mana, which is also what
great.
Spirit did back
Yeah,
in the
which is
day.
yeah. So interesting new. Like, I don't think these are tertiary. I think these are very similar to like. I think they're. We haven't really seen it, but they're on specific items, and it doesn't seem like they can roll additionally. It means like the item just comes with this additional
Yeah,
like stat on it. So,
I
yeah, we'll
th-
see. We'll see what happens
I
with this,
think
but
that these are. I don't think these are actually going to be treated as stats. They're
yeah,
more like the kind of on equip text, but just written very differently from how it's normally written.
yeah, exactly, yeah. Um, so yeah, so that new stats on items and weapons, which is interesting. And then there is also the trinkets came out, so they released the trinket. So there's basically one trinket for each role. So melee trinket, caster trinket, healer trinket, tank trinket, and then there's one universal trinket. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it. I know the healer trinket is of the vein of like it's an on use that stores additional healing or a percentage of your healing, and then uses that percentage of healing, like whatever it uses, it sort of collects up when someone falls below 35% health. We've had other trinkets like this. They're not very good. Primarily just because of like the fact that you don't have control over when someone gets low. And then also you are not storing healing all the time. It's I think you have to use the trinket. It's on a 2-minute cooldown. So basically you have to make sure you're healing a bunch in a 10-second window and then not let anybody fall below 35% until like the next big event. So it's a weird trinket to use, we'll say,
Yeah.
from a healing point of view.
I'll mention that I know this is like the timey-wimey dungeon, but everything has haste on it. All the trinkets have haste on it. They give like big
Yeah.
haste procs, which is just, well, we'll get to why it might actually be good for Brewmaster in 10.1.5, but right now none of it is super good. There is the tank trinket's a cheat death trinket. They're situationally useful. You're not going to wear it all the time, but sometimes you're really glad you have it. So like that's a good one to just have available, right? And
Hmm.
frequently it doesn't matter what item level these are. Like I used a Kael'thas cheat death trinket on jailer progression. 3 tiers later.
Yeah.
So it's or 2 tiers later. It's the effect doesn't need to scale really, so you can get it on any difficulty, any item level, and just kind of like have it in your back pocket for if you need to cheat death. It does have an even longer cooldown than the Kael'thas one at 8 minutes,
Yeah.
but um, you know, if you need to cheat death, you need to cheat death.
Yeah. I feel like they'll always put one of these in the
Uh,
raid.
this is the first one in the expansion that we've got.
Yeah,
Um,
but I mean, like, I feel like there's always going to be one cheat death trinket in every expansion. Sorry, what I
yeah,
didn't
yeah, yeah.
really
So
like
like
fully. Yeah.
we got Daggerhaft in um Nighthold that I think was the first one. It was also buggy as hell and didn't work, so it was not actually a very good cheat death trinket.
Fair enough.
And also tanks were just ludicrously powerful, so you didn't need it.
Gotcha. One other 10.1.5 thing, which I actually didn't put in the notes, but just something just triggered me to remember this is that with 10.1.5.2, they are enabling cross realm trading of
Oh
items.
yeah.
So that's going to it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think for me, I think it's cross faction, or is it just cross realm or cross faction too? Let me find if I can find it real quick as we're talking about this.
I hope it's also cross faction because that would make things like we would complete the
Yeah.
raid and then have to give out loot and it's like, oh, I'm an alliance character, and it's like, let's fly back to the raid so we can trade.
Yeah. Let me see if faction. Yeah, so it seems like it's faction and realm, so it's
Yeah,
both.
good,
Um,
good.
so yeah, so now you can sort of trade things in guild if you have like a cross faction guild, or I think they mentioned specifically like like a raid stack that is not all in the same realm. But you just do it with like the same people every week. You can sort of trade consumables stuff like that between the group. So, good little change there. Good little change there. Well, cool. Let's. I mean, we sort of mentioned it or briefly hinted about it. But let's talk a little about these Brewmaster changes. I know that you specifically were like, I'm going to do a special episode just about Brewmaster
I
changes
wanted
while we're on
to,
vacation. So
and basically like the people that were working on it were like, it's too early, man. And I'm like, you're right, but also I do want to talk about it.
yeah, so
So
let's get into it. Let's get into it because I'm excited for this. So I know
okay,
nothing about it other than maybe I'll give the intro and then you can talk about the changes because I
okay,
think they added. Is this a new spell? They added a new spell called Press the Advantage,
yes.
which has a bunch of stuff about like it's like has stacks. It's got like an on hit nature damage thing.
The tooltip for
Trigger.
this thing is so long,
Yeah,
but
it's got
it
like so
really
much stuff going on.
it doesn't do that much. So I
Okay.
actually want to, before we get into that, I want to mention one other thing.
Okay.
That is just a nice little quality of life thing for Brew. I'm pulling up the talent tree. This is from the PTR on Wowhead. Um, Counter Strike and Facepalm had their positions flipped, which means that you no longer have to take Facepalm to pick up Counter Strike and Mythicals, which is good
Oh, okay.
because you Facepalm was purely like Tiger Palm related, whereas Counter Strike also impacted Spinning Crane Kick and gave you like a damage double on Spinning Crane Kick, and so you wanted that for Mythic Plus, but you didn't care about Facepalm, but you had to spend 2 points for Counter Strike. You don't have to do that anymore. You can just pick up Counter Strike. So that's
Oh,
like
nice.
just a quick little thing. This is a very nice little quality of life change for Brewmaster. Um, and then there's Press the Advantage. Okay, so one of the things about Brewmaster for the whole like expansion has been that this just got a bajillion buttons. There's so many buttons on this spec. Um, Press the Advantage removes two of them: Weapons of
Okay.
Order and Tiger Palm. This is a passive talent that replaces Tiger Palm. And basically, what it says is, well, okay, the initial version was just your auto attacks reduce your brew cooldowns by half a second per hit, deal additional nature damage, increase your damage done to them, stacking up to 10 times, and then at 10 stacks, your next Rising Sun Kick or Keg Smash consumes it to strike, to basically hit a second time. Like if you remember I mean, it's basically like the Windwalker like Rising Sun Kick proc thing from BFA where you just like kicked a second time,
Yeah.
or the old one Stave Off from Legion for Brewmaster where you could Keg Smash and your Keg Smash could proc a Keg Smash.
Yeah.
Except in this case, um, the second hit does do everything the first hit did, including stuff like brew cooldown
Oh.
reduction. It can't then for like it doesn't chain like Stave Off did, which is probably the reason Stave Off didn't gives you like cooldown reduction on every hit. But
Yeah.
it does actually trigger that stuff a second time, and that second hit benefits from anything that would have buffed Tiger Palm.
Oh, okay.
And so that's where things start getting spicy. Um, the There were changes to it this week. I'm going to briefly talk about these before getting into the interactions with Tiger Palm buffs. Um,
Mhm.
and the changes this week, the main ones were it only triggers on main hand attacks. That still makes dual wielding better than two-handed weapons because
Mhm.
dual wielding. Well, actually, there's also now it triggers on attempted melee attacks, not just on successful hits. When you're dual wielding, your auto attacks have a chance to miss. Um,
Right, yeah.
and that ends up working out to making it like 30% faster stat gain on um, dual wield than on two-handed builds.
Mhm.
So you are still incentivized to use two weapons, whether you like that or not. That is currently how the numbers work out. Um, then there's a couple of bug fixes that aren't really relevant because they only were like it's PTR bugs, right? And then they nerfed. So Chi Surge is the talent below this that currently, when you use weapons of order, you get a dot on targets around you that also reduces the cooldown on weapons of order. Well, it was triggering every time that you consumed that 10th stack of Press the Advantage
Ah,
at full value, which was enormous amounts of damage. And so now that got reduced. It's like half value now for Press the
gotcha.
Advantage triggers. Um, but then we get into like all the different effects that buff Tiger Palm, because Tiger
Yeah.
Palm as a spell does not do very much damage by itself. Um, so there's a lot of modifiers in the Brewmaster tree that increase Tiger Palm damage by 100% or 50%, these kind of big numbers. And when you take those and you put them on Rising Sun Kick or on Kick Smash,
Yeah.
things get very different. Um, so the easiest one to control is definitely Blackout Combo. So I wanted to talk about this as well. I don't know if we'll have time, but there's a build running around right now for pure single target where you actually do go back to the Legion like Blackout Combo Tiger Palm
Okay.
rotation. Not exactly the old rotation because we have a lot more buttons now, um, but that same kind of idea, and that was like current. It beat the rank one on Magmorax by like 6k DPS,
Oh
stuff
wow.
like that. And so that's been running around. Like I think Nish Brew from Peak, if you want to go bother him in Brew Lounge, I'm sure he would enjoy it. Um, kind of like was the first one that I saw at least that was like really executing that at a high level, and now it's spread. Um,
Yeah.
but Tiger Palm's effect on Blackout Combo just reads Tiger Palm's damage is increased by 100%. That
Yeah.
works on Keg Smash and on Rising Sun Kick with Press the Advantage.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
Initially, the Keg Smash AoE, like it was not buffing the AoE part of the Keg Smash, just like the main target hit. I don't know if the current one is buffing AoE. I think it's supposed to, but I'm not sure that it need to actually check on that. But then there's also stuff like I mentioned Counter Strike. Counter Strike says each time you dodge or an enemy misses you, your next Tiger Palm or Spinning Crane Kick deals 100% increased damage. Face Palm. Tiger Palm has a 50% chance to deal 200% of normal damage.
So that'll stack then.
That all stacks.
Oh Jesus. Okay.
The
That's
largest
hilarious.
Rising Sun Kick that I've seen is 650k.
Jesus. Okay.
That is, for those keeping track at home, that is one beacon to the beyond of damage. And
That
that
is
thing does a lot
wild.
of damage. Now, that
That's
is
wild.
that is the stars align. Like Facepalm doesn't have a buff; it's just a proc. So there's just a chance that you get that
Yeah.
right. Um, which it's a 50%. It's 50-50. Counter Strike is a buff. You can track it. You can play around it. Blackout Combo, obviously something you can play around. And then of course there's stuff like Bone Dust Brew, um, that if you have all of your stars aligned, you hit for 650k on Rising Sun Kick. Bone Dust Brew can, of course, copy that hit at 40% effectiveness,
Hmm.
making that hit, effectively about a million damage,
Yeah.
which is
Jesus, dude. That's crazy.
it's it's crazy. Among other
That's
things that this does, it really, really buffs the value of Wind Fury Totem. Um, Before
oh
some of
yeah.
the nerfs to Press the Advantage this weekend or this week, um, Brewmaster was, I think, second on actual like raw DPS gain from Wind Fury Totem with Press the Advantage.
Oh
Um,
wow. Okay.
which now it's dropped quite a bit, but it's still good.
Hmm.
And this scales really well off of haste because haste increases your auto attack rate, whereas crit and verse do not. There's some weird stuff going on where right now you want to put this on Rising Sun Kick and single target, and you don't. Um, you both gain stacks too slowly to use it on every Rising Sun Kick, and gain stacks too quickly to use it on every other Rising Sun kick. It's like in between the two.
Yeah.
And so there's like some weird stuff there, but in general, like I don't know the current optimal rotation stuff. Kate's been working on that, putting a ton of work into getting press the advantage functioning in SimC, which is now mostly operational, and then working on the rotation. There's a few different ideas that people have been cooking up, like maybe you do build haste now, and that makes you get stacks faster because you auto attack faster, and then that lets you like use it on every Rising Sun kick. But then is it worth losing the crit inverse that then buffs your big hits, right?
Right.
You want more frequent ones, or do you want bigger ones, and that kind of thing. So there's like that thing, people figuring that out. And I honestly don't think that we're done with changes to press the advantage because this thing is ridiculous. Just absolutely ridiculous.
That seems
Um,
awesome.
yeah, and so in what this does, it reduces the number of buttons that you have by 2. There's actually
Hmm.
another set of changes to the class tree actually that is targeted at fundamentally the same thing. The diffuse magic and dampen harm nodes are now choice nodes with passive defensive gain. So one of them, like dampen harm's choice node, is your dodge chance is increased by 10%.
Gotcha.
And the diffuse magic one is you gain a stacking absorb shield that only absorbs magic damage up to like 10% of your health. And so what both of these are good for is if you're not doing content where you need the cooldown,
Hmm.
you can take the passive power gain and have one fewer button that you need to make. So if you picked a bunch of the new passive options from 10.1.5, you could, cut like 4 buttons off of your action bars. Now, only
Hmm.
2 of those are rotational. Actually, only one of those is rotational. Only Tiger Palm is rotational. Um, but it's still, not having to push weapons of order, not having to think about, diffuse magic or dampen harm. And I
Yeah.
think for a lot of players, they're doing like even up to 20s in some cases, like just not having to think about using your cooldowns is going to be better. There's a lot of keys that you just don't need that many
Right.
cooldowns as a brewmaster. As you push higher, you absolutely do need them, but as you push higher, I think the expectation is that you can manage that additional complexity.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it seems like the changes seem crazy, right? Like the
Yeah,
high roll, the ability to high roll this seems pretty nuts.
yeah.
Um, yeah, it'd
The
be interesting to see how it plays out for you guys.
yeah, the interesting thing is that it reduces the number of buttons, but that reduced button rotation is actually probably more involved.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's a thing. It's a thing. There's also I have a lot of stuff that I'm gonna have to do for like the WoW analyzer support for all of this.
Hmm.
Um, but also I have a now like immediately before all of this came out, the blackout combo Tiger Palm thing kind of came out, and so I was like, okay, how do I deal with this? There's no talent differences for the blackout combo talent or Tiger Palm like rotation from just the
Yeah.
regular rotation. It's the same talent. It's identical talents,
Oh,
and
interesting. Interesting.
the only difference is what you're using your combos on. And so like using it on Keg Smash and Breath of Fire is less damage, more tanky, except in AoE where it's more damage and also more tanky. Um, versus like the Tiger Palm one that is just more raw single target output, but only if you really really are good at getting like all of your blackout casts, getting them all in shard passions, getting all of your like do not cast Tiger Palm without the buff, all the stuff. Um, so I have to figure out how I like auto switch the rotational stuff based on what you did to like pick out and give like good feedback. Because like if you look at I played the Tiger Palm one on Magmorax,
Yeah.
and I got like rank 7, which I went from our first night where I wasn't playing it to our second night where I was playing it, and I went up genuinely 13k DPS.
Jesus. Okay.
Um, but it's like Magmorax is basically the perfect fight for it because it's 100% uptime on the boss. You're a single target, no ads, none of that. So it's like the one fight where it's like really exceptionally good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so I have to figure out for WoW Analyzer how I automatically switch the rotational analysis to that. Because if you look
Yeah.
at my Magmorax, it's just like, you screwed up, man. You screwed up. All your combos are going
Everything.
into Tiger Palms. You're not supposed to do that, but I was doing that intentionally, and it did work well.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, cool. I mean, it sounds like at least some cool changes to Brewmaster. Right? I know you guys have been sort of clamoring for something, so it's cool that
Brewmaster
brand new
is,
talent.
yeah, I think Brewmaster is honestly in a really good spot right now, at least for like the
Yeah.
content that I do, which is, 20s, maybe pushing up into 20, 22, 23 kind of territory. Nothing super high.
Hmm.
And then just raid. Like, it's really good in raid. It does a lot of damage. It brings buffs. Actually, the monk auras are actually quietly very good.
Yeah.
Tell anybody, but 8% increased healing received is really good.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hidden from logs, so most people don't see it. But yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Um.
but this does hopefully it ends up in a point where the new rotation that uses press the advantage is not like heinously complicated, so that people that are struggling with just the raw number of rotational buttons that Brewmaster has and cooldowns and all this stuff can just go like, okay, I'm going to play the passive options and I'm not going to worry about it, and have a rotation that is more accessible to them.
Gotcha. Yeah. Nice. Yeah, it seems like it seems like the talent's doing a ton of stuff. I mean, the tooltip's definitely got a lot in it, but it seems like even just selecting the talent is like an interesting change to the way that Brewmaster plays. So,
Yeah.
um, well, cool. That's crazy for again sitting here talking about like a .5 patch that introduced a bunch of changes like this
Yeah.
just to Brewmaster, and it's not the only class, right? Like we mentioned at the start, like mages are getting Fire and Frost are getting some pretty significant changes. Augmentation is a new spec being introduced is crazy, and
Yeah.
then um yeah, all that. Yeah, I can't wait. My evoker is 424 now, getting
Nice,
up there,
nice.
has 4 piece. So
I'm working on my mage because they're killing Rune of Power, and I cannot be more excited.
that's true. That is
Um,
true.
so my mage is not quite 424. It's, I think, up to like 415. I actually might try and get a few more eye levels so I can go to our all heroic tomorrow.
Yeah, no, I need I did all of hero. I did all of LFR normal and everything but Echo and Sarkrath on heroic. The
Yeah,
pug I was
yeah.
in fell apart, but I need a chance at that legendary,
Yep, yep.
my evoker legendary. Well, cool. Anything else on the Brewmaster changes or anything else in 10.15?
No, that's like, man, there's just we are going to hit 10.15, and we're going to have a rotate, like an initial, like, here's what to play initially. But I think the
Mm-hmm.
big thing to keep in mind is that um that's going to change almost certainly. Like, we're gonna have an
Yeah.
initial rotation. It is unlikely to be the actual final rotation that everybody settles on for 10 point. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess one thing we didn't mention, I missed this in the news somehow. But we do have a release date for 10.15.
oh
Should probably
yeah,
have said that.
July 11th, right?
July 11th it comes out. So,
Which
yeah,
is
it's
two
in two
resets.
resets. Yeah. Yeah, so
No,
there's this reset, the July 4th reset, and then it's out.
so
So,
the third one from now. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So, and yeah, it comes with, I think the biggest thing is going to be the new mega dungeon, of course, is the big thing, but then there's also the new augmentation spec, which is there. The Kalimdor Cup, which is a dragon fighting event all over Kalimdor, is in there. There's something called Whelp Daycare, where I think you can raise a little whelpling. And then Time Rifts, which are just new public events. So lots of new like world content plus the dungeon. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, it'll be yeah. Sorry, I forgot to mention that or put that in the notes. But yeah, July 11th, new 10.15 over there. So it's only a couple weeks away. So
Yeah. Yeah.
well, cool. And I think the final topic, only about 10 minutes left, I think, in our overall timer here is we sort of, I don't know, actually, don't even, we touched on this. There were a number of nerfs to Aberrus, the raid over the past couple weeks. And
Yeah.
so what maybe we talk about the easy ones first and then the interesting one, we'll say.
Yeah.
I think everybody
Okay.
knows about. So the first set of nerfs is just an easy one. Kasara got a health reduction and then also damage reduction on internal fusion or infernal fusion. I'm sorry, which is when you cross the beams.
Yeah.
So damage reduction 10% there and then 10% health nerf there. And Sarkareth got a number of nerfs, particularly to the damage that they're doing, along with some visual clarity updates. So they updated the visual clarity on both the red swirlies in P1, the fire things, and then the Oblivion, not Oblivion, whatever the purple swirlies are in
Yeah.
phases 2 and
I
3.
think they're literally called motes of oblivion, so like you're not far
Yeah,
off.
yeah. Along with that, they also lowered the damage of Scorching Detonation and Oblivion by 10%. Which we thought that's a decent number of nerfs, but what actually happened, particularly to Oblivion, is they ended up over nerfing it. And basically, it turns out they actually nerfed it by about 33% the damage to Oblivion, which is fairly large, we'll say.
Yeah.
To the point.
Oblivion's
Oh,
around
sorry.
60% of all the damage that was taken in
Yep.
phase 2 and phase 3 of Sarkareth.
Yeah, and by nerfing it by 33%, essentially the only healing check in that fight is P1. Meaning if
Yeah.
you get through P1 cleanly, the actual damage that's done, or like particularly from Oblivion, is reduced by 33%. It's a large damage reduction to the point where like I think the initial math that I saw in this initial sort of just anecdotal, maybe not math, we'll say anecdotal like responses to this was like the P2 and P3 healing checks are like lower than Rashok is
Yeah.
in Mythic, and about I think even with it in Heroic. So yeah, it's a huge amount of just general damage reduction across the fight. Blizzard did come out and say they're not going to change this. So this over nerfing of Oblivion will stay in place. But it basically will make your progression through progression through phase 2 and phase 3 of this fight significantly easier. So
Yeah. I mean, I
um,
think that they came out and they said, we're not going to, fix this partially for technical reasons. Like if you look at the actual spell data from the nerf, they changed the coefficient on the damage modifier for Oblivion from 3 to 2.7. And
mhm.
basically what it looks like actually happened is that field that they modified doesn't actually accept fractional values. So when it dropped below 3, it went straight to 2, which is a 33% nerf.
Yeah.
So I suspect that there's some technical limitations there that would have been hard for them to fix, but I don't have any like internal knowledge or anything. That's just me guessing.
Yeah.
Um, but then also due to the whole Zskarn situation, I think that they were concerned about basically giving 30 guilds that killed it between the Tuesday where the nerf happened and the Thursday where people realized, hey, this is broken.
Yeah.
Um, a significantly easier boss after what happened with Zskarn.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the other, I guess, the other part of this. So actually, one final thing on Sark, right? This is the visual updates. I think are Oblivion, of course, the damage reduction is massive in terms of the fight design, but then also the visual updates are really clear now. So it's very clear where the red swirlies are, very clear where the purple swirlies are. So
Yeah,
you shouldn't have any ambiguity in like where you're standing or what you're standing in, which is a good change.
yeah.
They need to stop doing floor color with like projected texture of ability having a similar floor color like
I
thing.
don't
They
think
did this on Denathrius.
Denathrius,
Like
yeah.
it was very clear. I mean, even I think it's more the purple swirlies on Sakura. The old ones, they were that I don't know. They were just like a muted purple that sometimes looked very similar to the floor.
Well, it was also that you couldn't see them under the meteor effect in phase 3.
That too, yeah. That too too.
We actually like I had one where we were just group soaking a meteor in phase 3 on heroic, and I was tanking and I got sent down while my co-tank was downstairs because I was in the group so couldn't see the swirly under me and just went downstairs. It's like, oh well, I guess we're dead now.
Yeah,
As the boss
yeah.
just ran around one-shotting people while both tanks were downstairs.
So funny.
Um,
Um,
and so that's the other thing that they changed about the swirlies in phase 3 is actually that they basically stack on top of the meteor so you can see them.
yeah. Yeah, which is good. But then I guess on to the larger fight that was nerfed this week, which is old Mythic Zskarn. So we'll cover the unimportant ones and maybe then the more interesting ones. So first off, elimination protocol, which is the lines that go out on targets. had its damage reduced by 20%, which I think is just helpful to sort of get rid of some of the weird one-shotty stuff that could happen. They also increase the duration of salvage parts, so which are the things you pick up off of golems. They now stay on you for 2 minutes versus just a minute, which helps in like holding onto some of them to get specific traps.
This is actually
Um,
a nice little change because one of the things that would happen is you would have trap parts and you just had to use them or you would lose them. So you would just get rid of a random trap. And then the very next set of traps you would get like completely screwed by RNG. And you had just had to use your trap removal on something that didn't matter, which was very frustrating. You couldn't
yeah,
you couldn't actually save traps to deal with the really bad RNG. Now you can do more of that, so that does help. Also,
yeah,
want to mention the other part of the elimination protocol nerf. They reduced the like when you get hit, it was 500% increased damage this next time you got hit. Now it's 300%. So those two things combined, I think, means that you don't get literally one shot by the second hit. It's just very
the
dangerous.
first one. Gotcha. Gotcha. And then the final, which is probably the biggest nerf or the biggest change of the fight, is that Dragonfire traps now activate consistently based on Zskarn's location. So there's a couple different. I mean, I think the main way to interpret this is that the random traps that are spawned around the arena no longer occur. Traps will be based on where Zskarn is positioned. The one question I have, which I don't think came out, I don't think anyone's. These aren't live yet. They go live with
With
the
the weekly
reset
reset,
next
yeah.
week. Is does this mean there are now only 2 traps spawned each time they spawn, or are there now 3 or 4 traps spawning around Zskarn on Mythic, which means maybe that's worse.
Yeah, I hope it's neither of those. I genuinely, I hope it's neither of those. I hope it's not just two traps because then, like, the damage check there is just like you need like less damage to kill that than you needed to kill like Brewkeeper Dire or something. It's just
Yeah,
it's not a thing. Um, what I hope it means personally, and what I think it means, is basically you get two traps near in the same pattern as you do now, and you get two traps far, and they're deterministic to some degree. Like they're just far from the boss,
gotcha.
or just not right on top of it, so that you get four traps and just like make melee miserable. Um, but also aren't dealing with two random traps that sometimes wall you off from an important place that you're trying to get.
Yeah,
So yeah, there's a lot we could say about Zskarn. I think we're both kind of on the same page that the general community reaction to Zskarn ended up being more or less memed to death.
yeah,
Like the boss was not great, but there was something good there, and it wasn't actually that bad. It was annoying
no,
to progress, right? It was annoying
yeah,
to like wipe to really bad trap RNG.
right. But I think yeah, we mentioned this in the pre-show a little bit. Is it like the RNG factor? I think was less obtrusive, right? I think this wasn't a fight that was on rails. It was like you moved here, 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 and here, always the same time at this point in time. Like you couldn't. It wasn't as I guess scripted would have been the right word to use there. So you did have to deal with RNG traps, but like I feel like there was always a way to deal with them if you communicated. So I think it was more of a fight, and probably the first one of the first fights where like the entire time you needed 2 or 3 people in key roles to always be communicating, meaning like your trap clears need to communicate with your tanks, and then someone needed to be calling positioning. And so, yeah, you could get a bad trap spawn, which spawned maybe where you were moving or where your only safe spot was to sort of bait an elimination
Yeah,
protocol, or not elimination protocol, but the breathy from the
the
from
tactical
the
destruction. Yeah,
tactical discretion, right? But I think in general, as long as you were good at communicating what was happening, then the raid could sort of move together and sync. So it's almost
yeah,
like an elongated mecha torque, right? Where like
yeah,
instead of just a few people having communicating shapes during intermission, you had to communicate for the entirety of the fight. And
yeah.
like I agree, the random trap spawn, there were definitely times where we would wipe or we've wiped, and there was like quote unquote nothing we could have done. Meaning
Right.
like,
I think that that's a little bit hyperbolic. I've definitely said the same thing, right? Like,
yeah,
I think that technically speaking, there's always something that could have been done. Practically speaking, a lot of the time, like there was a very big gap between like some sets of traps that you could get and
yeah,
some others. Like sometimes you could get two traps at your location that you were put like your landing zone where you were running away from your destruction. And if you get
Yeah,
those while you're running away from tactical destruction, that is just massively, massively harder than
exactly.
basically anything else you could get there. Um, but if you get it on the set before or the set after, it's actually super chill and you can just remove them, right? It's the ones and the fact that it's like hard to do it. Like you can't have it'd be like, oh, everybody stop, we gotta let our trap clearers clear this. Both because you don't
Yeah,
have any trap clears yet, because you haven't killed the golems from that set yet, and you can't hold on to the previous set of golem trap clears for that set because they would
yeah.
expire after 60 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely that was, and that's sort of I think the one thing of the fight that has been my point always is that it seemed like traps were on a 2x speed and every other mechanic was at 1x, where like
Yeah.
there needed to be like some sort of either quickening of certain like the rest of the mechanics or slowing down trap spawns slightly.
So,
Um,
fun little thing that I noticed. On lower difficulties of Zskarn, golems happen in between tactical destructions instead of during tactical
oh,
destruction. That's like a way that they reduce the difficulty of the fight for lower difficulties.
gotcha. That
Um,
makes sense.
and that would actually dramatically reduce the difficulty of Mythic Zskarn, because then you do, by changing that timer, not only is it easier to deal with the golems because you don't have to do it during tactical destruction, but you
Hmm.
also have your trap clears. Or that hypothetically, like there's still the problem of actually targeting the trap and using the thing while you're moving. But at least in theory, you would have had a trap clear that you.
Exactly. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I mean, I think again, I think the backlash, even in my own raid group, like I would say that like there's probably like 4 or 5 people that share my sentiment of like wasn't as bad as people made it out to be. But
Yeah.
the majority of my raid group is on that sort of bad wagon of saying like this is the worst fight ever. We're like, I mean,
No,
we were even talking in the
we
pre-show,
were.
like
Kel'Thuzad
there's
was
like
worse.
Kel'Thuzad is worse. Like arguably is worse to wipe to having to kill something within a specific 8 second window, like 3 times in a row. Like
Yeah.
that to me was more frustrating wiping to that than like getting
Kel-
knocked back from Skarn
yeah.
into a trap spawn and then dying. Like that's like, okay, well, go next, right? Like it's yeah.
Even
So
then, like Kel'Thuzad is just like one person messes up and your whole raid wipes kind of thing, where like you have your
yeah.
downstairs team and one person and it dies, and now you don't kill it in time, and your entire upstairs group has to like stop so you can kill them. Like even when you had the damage to do it down a person in the down phase
Yeah.
on farm, you then had to have your entire upstairs stop so
So they didn't
that
kill theirs fast.
they didn't kill theirs too fast. It was just a whole thing. It was a pain in the ass. At least on Zskarn, one person messing up is one person dying a
Yeah.
lot of the time. That's just how it is. Now there are people that can like be the one person that messes up and just the entire raid dies, because I've done that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's very much a tank thing. Or you know, the odd like
Taking elimination
person.
protocol over the stack spot where you're supposed
Yeah,
to be the safe
yeah,
spot and like
yeah,
yeah, running it through the raid. Yeah.
yeah. So there's like a couple things, but it's not nearly as egregious as Kel'Thuzad.
No, no, no. Yeah, and yeah, even I mean, even I'd say even Fate Scribe was worse.
Oh
And
yeah,
like,
yep.
um, yeah. So I would say that like community perception probably overblown, and you're right, like a little memed about. But at the same time, I think we need to see what this first bullet point is, which is
Yeah,
that like
yeah.
how the traps actually activate. So
Yeah, I will say that I had fun progressing this boss, but in a lot of ways it was a little bit of like fun in spite of the boss because of the people I was playing with,
yeah,
right? Like more so than like the boss itself was fun. There are bosses that are fun even if you're playing it with like randos or people that you don't like.
yeah,
Um, that's not Scarred.
yeah, yeah,
But it was definitely a boss that you could have fun on, and I did. So
yeah, yeah. No, yeah. It was a decent decent little fight. So but cool. I think that is everything. We're a little bit over our 60-minute target time,
yeah, I
new
think
target
that's okay.
time.
I think that's
Yeah,
okay.
I think we're okay. But I didn't have anything else. Other than I have to get ready for Sarkarat this week. So
Yeah.
like,
Phase one hurts. But then you
yeah,
get
that's
phase
what
two, and phase two doesn't hurt. So you can kind of just throw all of your healing cooldowns in phase one and then have them all back for the end of phase three when you need them.
yeah, exactly. That's gonna be the plan. Although to be fair, our biggest issue is just gonna be having a consistent comp, we'll say over the next couple weeks, because vacation boss is hitting us pretty hard. So
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, good
so
luck. Good luck with that.
yeah, we'll
Let's
see. We'll see how we go. We'll see how we
we'll
do.
see. Yeah, that is going to be it for our show today. Thank you all for watching and or listening. And if you enjoyed this podcast, you want to support it and the other work that we do over at the Peak of Serenity, you can do that over at our Patreon at patreon.com/Peak of Serenity. And of course, come and join the Discord. That is the best place to keep up with the up and coming tech around stuff like Press the Advantage or the new Brewmaster rotational stuff around Blackout combo and Tiger Palm and when it's good and when you really shouldn't do it, and all sorts of stuff like that. But yeah, that is it for the show today. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next week.
Bye.